My name is Jennifer Lupiba, and I am a product marketing manager for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And I've been asked today to talk about how to make the case to management paying for open source. So with that said, this is definitely not a technical session because the value of a Red Hat subscription isn't necessarily in the capability advantages of the bits. It's more around the value that enables those capability advantages, the value around stability, security, innovation, the relationship with our partners. So you're probably here because many of you have been asked this question, or you've asked yourself this question: why are we paying Red Hat for free software? Is this a conversation you have to have often in your environments? Some? Yes? Every day? Thank you, Thomas. I'm concerned if you're having that conversation. Yes. I'm interested in how that comes up. What are the reasons that question's being asked inside of your organization? Anybody care to?
Budgets.
I'm sorry?
Budgets.
Budgets. Yes, that would be number. Sorry?
Cost reduction.
Cost reduction, certainly.
Margins.
Yep. That's okay.
We're paying for support with employees.
You have the resources. All right. No, these are good. These are a lot of the points that I'm going to be trying to hit throughout the presentation. So it sounds like I'm going to hopefully have a good presentation then. All right. So I'll give you the short answer, and then I'll go into the longer answer. I have this great analogy that I'm going to use. I might have to refer to my notes a few times to make sure I'm hitting it right. But the short answer is, just right up front, the Red Hat subscription, the value of a Red Hat subscription is it allows you to focus on your company's core competencies. Because we're taking care of the infrastructure, we're taking care of all of the things that go into making open source enterprise ready, and the ongoing maintenance and security of that software. So that's a really short description, and we'll explore that throughout. And that we're able to deliver that because there's a continual cycle that the subscription, there's a continual cycle of access and advocacy that your subscription delivers to you. So in the short of it, access to innovation, that's the stable technology. You have to have the bits. So it's bringing together those thousands of open source projects into the various different solutions that we offer and making sure that they're stable. It's the access to the experience, the ongoing support. So in case you don't have those hired personnel, or if you do, and there's a lot of ongoing training and bringing people up to speed, especially as you're expanding your Linux footprint in your environment. Flexibility for your plans. So you have various different plans. Those plans are in different timelines. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then advocacy. And this is, think about this for your future requirements. It could be, advocacy for your requirements in the next release, or 5 years down the road, big picture items that you're looking at. And that's through the relationship that we have with our thousands of hardware, software, and cloud providers, the leadership and contribution we have in the upstream community, and then the advocacy for those assurances, those certifications you need to prove that your infrastructure is secure and efficient to house the applications and data. Right? So stepping back before we get into that and get into my analogy that I'm going to be using, I wanted to step back and talk about what you're trying to do. So we heard on stage this morning from a lot of those Innovation Award winners, the various different things they're trying to accomplish. One person is securing the borders of their country. Somebody else is trying to improve their logistics. I was in a customer panel this morning, and there's a retailer trying to stay competitive in the online retail industry, especially when there's other big giants and disruptive giants out there. And so they are going through this digital transformation in order to stay ahead. And as you mentioned, in that digital transformation, cost efficiencies are always a concern. I heard cost efficiencies in many different forms out here in the poll. Security, making sure that that transformation and that your infrastructure that you're transforming and that will carry those, differentiators that you're trying to deliver to the customer, that they're secure, you'll stay out of the headlines, and that they're delivered in a predictable manner. You don't want to just create create a solution that gives you a competitive advantage, but it's not predictable and it's not reliable, right? So I think a lot of this goes back to cost efficiencies, and that's where I'm going to try to focus a lot of the discussion here. There was a discussion in the room earlier. And so a lot goes back to cost efficiencies, and we often hear, well, I can save operating expenditure by taking my Red Hat bits and getting third-party support. It'll be less expensive. Or I can just go use a free community-supported version of Red Hat that's out there. I see some smiles in the room. I think some people might have considered this as well. And so when this goes through your brain, or so you hear somebody questioning the value of what they're paying to Red Hat every year, I think it's interesting to ask this question, and it's a totally different question. It's going to come out of left field. Why doesn't an airline build and maintain their own airplanes? Right? So an airline is in the business of delivering people and goods on time and in a safe manner. That's their core competency, and that's what they focus on. All right? Their focus is not, and their competency is not in the R&D. It's not in the building, the testing, the certification of that airplane. I mean, it's not even in the food. They don't even, put together their own food. They outsource to caterers for that, because they know that their way to deliver on their core competencies, be competitive, and keep costs low is to focus on just that one thing they do really well, which is deliver people and goods. So I want to use an airplane analogy to talk about a lot of those pieces that I briefly mentioned before. So we're going to build an airplane. Some people might ask, what does an airplane have to do with your infrastructure? I've heard it said that like millions of lines of code, an airplane is millions of parts flying in close formation. There's a connection there. But they have similar requirements, the airplane and the infrastructure. And the airplane manufacturer and Red Hat have similar requirements and similar processes that they have to go through. So first, similar requirements. Let's set the stage and make sure this is a valid analogy. So as airplanes, we talked about, airlines use them as their means to safely and effectively deliver goods. Our infrastructure is there to securely, reliably, and efficiently deliver those applications that we're trying to serve out to our customers. And they're based on similar requirements. They certainly require the technology, require an airplane and the bits that go into the airplane, as well as the bits that go into our Red Hat solutions. There's certifications, compliance, assurances, flexibility, support, and security. And we're going to talk through each of those moving forward. So I have to get my notes out here because I have a couple pieces I want to make sure I hit. Oh. All right, so let's talk about the first one, technology. So first, to build an airplane, you actually have to have the parts to build the airplane. This is an image of a Rolls-Royce jet engine. It's used in the wide-body A350s and 787s. When an airplane manufacturer is deciding to build a new airplane, oftentimes that comes from the airline requirements and the customer requirements. And so a little history lesson. In 1965, Pan Am's president went to Boeing and asked them to build a plane to meet the demands for commercial air travel, which was rapidly increasing, but also to build a plane that would be fuel efficient and reduce energy consumption. So I think that's definitely the definition of doing more with less right there. And so that gave birth to the 747 that is still in flight today. Maybe not with US Airlines anymore, but certainly with private companies and other airlines around the world. And for Boeing to build that 747 or the 787 recently, or Airbus, any of their models, the airplane manufacturer works with thousands of suppliers and partners. They work with key partners, like for the 747, they work with Pratt & Whitney to design that fuel-efficient, high-bypass turbofan engine that went into the 747 with the GE, they worked with Rolls-Royce on this one. And the point here is that they have the influence with those key partners to drive their roadmaps. Similar to how Red Hat has that influence with our partners to drive their roadmaps, with our key Rolls-Royce partners, right? And so the other part that the airplane manufacturer does, it takes those thousands of suppliers and partners who are working on projects in parallel and pulls all of those together to actually put the plane together. And the point I wanted to make here about that is when you have all of those different pieces and parts, imagine if Delta decided to build their own airplane and had to go through the thousands and thousands of man hours that were required to build this, design it, put all the pieces together, work with all the different partners. I mean, how much more the cost of a ticket would go up because they're shifting focus from their core competencies. And so the same with Red Hat. Red Hat is advocating for your requirements so you can focus on those core competencies. And we do that through our extensive R&D. You can go to Yahoo Finance and see we put 19% of our revenue back in R&D. We are one of the top contributors to the kernel, as well as the maintainer for hundreds of subsystems. So we had that leadership in the upstream community to take those requirements that you have and build them back into the upstream community. Working with those partners, so like I mentioned about the airplane manufacturer working with Rolls-Royce or Whitney and Pratt to design the engine, we have that leadership to work with, and lobby, IBM, AWS, Microsoft, and work in your requirements into their roadmaps. And of course, we take all that, develop it, test it, and harden it so that it's enterprise ready. And so just this one example, think about this. If you were using free community supported software, and you said, I have the resources internally, you're missing out on this whole advocacy piece from that if you're using that free community supported software. Those requirements, and the same with if you're going to third-party support. Those requirements that you have nobody to go and advocate that to. Or you'd have to hire a heck of a lot of people to go advocate that out into all those different partners and all of those different communities. The next part of building an airplane comes with certification. So each airplane is legally not allowed to fly until it is conferred with a certificate of airworthiness, which means it's meeting build, operations, and maintenance standards that they have to adhere to. The airplane manufacturer goes out and seeks these airworthiness certifications. And I think we would like to say that we'd all like to fly on a plane that has been certified to be airworthy. And our infrastructure needs to be airworthy. We need to make sure our infrastructure is secure, stable, and efficient to run the apps and the data that it houses. And we often have to meet certain regulatory compliance and certifications to maintain, in order to run that infrastructure and to be in some of the industries that we're in. So Red Hat gives you the certified components and tools you need so you can operate with confidence. So it's going out and achieving common criteria certifications, VIP certifications, delivering tools that you can use to maintain that compliance, like the NIST certified scanner, open SCAP, and within there we ship national checklist content so that you can apply and DISASTIG or PCI DSS policies against your environment. And then we also provide a solution such as Red Hat Insights. I think we showed that on the keynote stage yesterday. And you can use that. That's also one of those tools that we provide to help you maintain your compliance or performance or security configurations as it's going out and continually monitoring and remediating. This is similar to how airplanes have real-time engine health built in. And so as the airplane is flying and something's happening with the engine, it's sending that information back down to ground crews so that if there is a serious need or even a tune-up that is required, that the ground crew is alerted to that issue and is ready with the parts before the plane even lands. And Red Hat Insights provides very similar capabilities for your environment. All right. And I should note, Red Hat Insights is very unique to Red Hat and is certainly not, there's not a community clone out there for that one. Assurances. So this is an interesting one. I'll explain it this way. So you're flying to Summit, you land, you're excited to get here, you really want to get to my session. Your plane pulls up to the gate and you cannot disembark because the airplane manufacturer decided to build a plane, give it to the airline. It never worked with the airports to make sure that the jet bridge can actually connect to the airplane. So there's a 3-foot gap. I know it's a simple analogy, but I think it's an important analogy to understand that as an airplane manufacturer has to work with the airport to make sure that they're designing airplanes that will work with their environment. You know, with your infrastructure, you're also seeking those assurances that the solutions that you're deploying will work with your existing hardware, infrastructure, or your cloud provider. You're also seeking those assurances that if I upgrade, if I patch this, will my system continue to work? And so Red Hat provides similar assurances here to protect your investments. So I was in a meeting earlier today, and the customer was saying that they would spend, a year trying to certify our solutions on their hardware that they would want to use, and like we're done using that. We want to use your certifications. And we talked to them, we explained the thousands of hours that go involved into certifying the hardware or software or cloud solutions. And they, you see their eyes light up about how much time that they could save instead of focusing there and instead relying on Red Hat to provide those certifications that they need. Assurances that the solution that you're purchasing with Red Hat works within the entire portfolio. So from the ground up with RHEL all the way up the stack, the solutions are finely tuned to continue to work together. And then one of the unique things about Red Hat Enterprise Linux is the compatibility commitments that we make. And so throughout the 10-year life cycle of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we offer to architects stable kernel ABIs so that they can run some of their oldest hardware along some of the newest innovations. And they can choose to upgrade when they see fit. We also offer the sysadmins their stable management interfaces so they don't have to continue to retool and rescript every time that there's a upgrade or minor upgrade. And stable APIs and ABIs for the developers. That's going to reduce a lot of the testing and recertification cycles that they have to go through with every minor update. And these are assurances that come directly from Red Hat that can't be replicated with third-party support, especially if that third-party support is adding in some of their own patches. That's not something that they can continue to offer, and it's certainly not something that the certifications are not something that is automatically conferred on some of those third-party or those free community-supported solutions that are out there. All right. Another reason it would be silly for an airline to build and maintain their own airplanes is the experience, the support. When they're buying an airplane, they're making a commitment to that manufacturer, and there's a trust involved there that that manufacturer will continue to support and develop that product. And so they rely on the airplane manufacturer for the replacement parts to resolve safety issues. And the airline itself, like Delta, I usually use them because that's the one I fly. If Delta decided to save some operating expenditures, they had some margin issues, and hey, let's get rid of our maintenance contract with Boeing, they're going to have to hire all of the additional staff in order to maintain those airplanes. They're going to have to buy the warehouses to put all the additional parts in. So think about, again, how much that removes their attention away from their core competencies. It also doesn't reduce any operating expenditures. It's really just hiding it in HR, real estate, and airplane parts, all right? And with Red Hat, the Red Hat support gives you that predictability to control those operating expenditures. So instead of having to hire all the additional resources to go out and monitor those upstream communities, monitor the changes in the forums for the free community-supported software, you can dedicate your time focusing more on those innovations because you have one place to call, and that's Red Hat. And of course, you have access to the portal, the knowledge base, the access to training, which is certainly huge. We talked to another customer today who's expanding their Linux footprint. They have a lot of Unix engineers who need additional training in order to stay up with this transformation that they're going through. So access to that training through Red Hat is key, all right? And so one thing I would make here, and this is something we see often, is, well, okay, I still need support, so I'll just take it to a third party to get support then, and it'll just be less expensive. I guess to keep with the airplane manufacturer or airline analogy, would you take your Airbus to a Jiffy Lube? You know, I know it's kind of silly, but makes the point. You know, would you take this huge machine any place other than the manufacturer to be serviced and updated and maintained? All right, the next piece is always interesting, and that's security. So security in an airplane is more than just the seat belts and keeping your tray and seat in the upright position. The airplane manufacturer is required to secure the supply chain for every single part in the airplane. So all the way down to the bolts have to be certified by the National Aviation Authority as a worthy part to be put into that airplane. And so the aerospace industry goes through considerable lengths to make sure that counterfeit parts don't make it into their supply chain, and they don't get forgeries and subpar materials into the planes that they're building. Look it up online. Counterfeit parts in airplanes is quite an interesting industry that has to be tackled. So they're securing that supply chain. And I think we would all agree that that's a good place for them to spend their time, because the analogy that airplane is millions of parts flying in close formation, well, I want to make sure that the bolts that are holding all those parts together are not made of subpar metal, right? So that's one piece, but they're also responsible for building in security. So like the 747, that's the example I keep going back to, they build in quadruple redundant hydraulic systems for the main landing gear, all the way to air gaps between the navigation network and our entertainment network. You always hear those reports that people are hacking into the plane. Well, they're just hacking into the entertainment system. So they're building in that security that's already built in. And you're relying on Red Hat to provide a lot of similar security assurances and services, right? So the Red Hat product security team is involved from the very beginning of development of a new solution or the next iteration of that release to secure that supply chain, reviewing that code base as it comes from upstream and works its way through the development cycle. And they're constantly involved with that, looking for those security issues and resolving those before it goes to GA. There's also the built-in security as provided in a lot of our solutions. And then the product security team provides the reactive security that you need. So I think SPECTRE and MELTDOWN is a good example. This statistic right here, 73% of CVEs were patched within 24 hours of public knowledge. That comes from our product security team. And so they're constantly staying on top of every security issue out there. And only a small segment of those actually make their way to affecting any of our systems. And when they do, they're on top of those and make sure that we're providing those patches back to the customer. And not just providing it back for like what's in market, but prior versions that are still supported, even those versions that now are in like ELS support. And we're providing guidance for those CVEs. So SPECTRE MELTDOWN was a great example because how widespread it was, it's a new form of attack. Also came with its own logo and media storm, which is always fun. But what they found through their analysis over the last several years, our product security team, is that the ones that really matter, that were probably the most critical for your organizations, most of them weren't branded. And so if it's not coming with its own media storm and you're using free community-supported software, how are you going to know that that's the patch that's going to matter in your environment? Right? I want to dive just a little bit deeper into this one as opposed to the other ones because I think it's so important and critical part of the value of your subscription. So speaking of SPECTRE and MELTDOWN, just give you a little history about that. We partnered with Intel and other members of the community, and we worked under a security embargo. Because of the size of Red Hat and the critical infrastructures that our customers support with our solutions, we were brought into these security embargoes earlier. This is what allows us to have that security patch on day one. So with SPECTRE and MELTDOWN, of course, we were brought into the same security embargo. We knew that we had a feeling that the embargo was going to lift early. In fact, we had a patch already ready even when it lifted early. We were the only vendor to maintain application and third-party driver compatibility with the fix. So that goes back to those assurances I talked about, the ABI compatibility. And we were also with the Red Hat product security team, we also provide those fixes back to minor versions, like I said. When SPECTRE MELTDOWN came out, I went to a particular community-supported clone for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and I started looking through the forums and just seeing the types of questions people were asking. And one, they have to go to the forum to ask these questions and then wait for some moderator to respond. And then the other thing, couple things I saw is there are quite a few people that said, I saw Red Hat patched, when are you going to patch? And I said, well, we have to take the bits, we have to strip out the branding, we have to put it out there. No mention of testing to make sure that works. Others said, I have standardized on X version. When are you going to provide that patch? And the response to that was, we only patch what's currently in market. We're not providing those previous patches. Whereas if you're standardizing on RHEL 7.3, we're providing those patches back to those standard versions. So those folks that did standardize on that free community supported solution were in a world of pain because suddenly they had to update their entire system. All right. So that's just a little bit of history and just, I think, reinforcing the value of a subscription around security. The last piece I have here is on flexibility. So I mentioned that building and investing in an airplane is really investing in the manufacturer. There's a trust that they're going to continue that development for a long period of time. An airline doesn't want to just purchase an airplane, for one trip. They're going to be using it for many years, and they want to make sure that that manufacturer is there not just to provide the support, but the long-term support. An example is the 747 was developed, as I said, back in the 1960s, and 40 years later, it's still being flown. In fact, Boeing has a backlog of 28 planes for that. And they're new, as they continue to produce those newer 747s, they're actually using technology from the 787 to modernize the 747. So I think that's a really great example of backporting right there. And I think it's similar with Red Hat. So Red Hat is giving you that predictability to execute on your timeline. So what does that mean? So it's that 10-year life cycle. So it's investing in a solution, investing in a platform, and knowing that you could sit there and write it for the full 10 years if you need. With a subscription, you're not deploying a particular version. You're getting a subscription, and you can deploy whichever version is supported out there. So there's multiple different versions. Usually 2 major versions that are in support at any given time, specifically for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. You can park on that and standardize on that minor version and get those updates like I had mentioned previously. And then, of course, if you've got some of those 747 type applications and infrastructures in your environment and you're just not ready to upgrade that, We also provide ongoing life cycle, additional life cycle, up to 3 years past that support, so that you can, and the whole idea is this is a lot of flexibility so that you can deploy the solution of your choice on the infrastructure of your choice in your timeline. All right. So here's a customer example out of Korea, I think. CTOS is a financial services firm. They were using a clone of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and they decided that they really needed to up their game. They had more regulations that they needed to meet. There were security concerns. And so they moved to Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And of course, they achieved their security. They achieved resolving those security concerns. Through that, they reduced their downtime. But one of the biggest things that they found out of this is the reduction in operating costs. By using paid subscription with RHEL instead of the free community support, they were actually able to reduce their operating costs. Those resources that were focused on building and maintaining that infrastructure, they were able to shift that instead and focus on more of those innovative projects. So I think that's huge. And I think that goes to some of the questions or some of the responses we had earlier about why are we paying for free software. And so again, those people who are saying we can save OpEx with third-party support, we can just hire a bunch of people and use free community-supported software, this is what you're really getting. You're really getting increased costs. You're not removing that operating expense. You're actually just hiding that in HR overhead, hiding that additional resources and just the time that that's consuming in order to support that. You're not receiving that security guidance or those backports, which are critical. And you're not getting that predictability, those assurances you need to make sure that that customer value that you're providing is going to be predictable and reliable and meet those goals. So those airlines that I mentioned quite often throughout here, they don't trust the airplane manufacturer they don't just outsource and trust the airplane manufacturer so they can focus on their core competency. They also focus on their core competency because they trust Red Hat. This is just a brag stat. 100% of Fortune 500 airlines rely on Red Hat and to provide that infrastructure. So I think in recap, again, the value of a Red Hat subscription is freeing up those resources so you can reduce your operating expenditures. It's allowing you to, again, go back and focus on your core competencies.